Now we've been talking about parking today, parking charges and fines. It might be a familiar story for you. You might have received one of these through the post. Did you question it? Did you appeal it? Let me know how that went. So you can text 81333, start your message RH. We heard from Sharon and Pete, who were fined for overstaying at Lidl's car park on Headon Road, even though they were actually in the Costa car park, which had a longer parking time. Pete says he's upset that his appeal was rejected, even though they had evidence to prove they'd parked correctly.
She said, why would they send me a parking fine? So I said, look, obviously I'll have to appeal it. I said, but when you pass in Lidl next time or pass in the Costa, take a photograph of the sign, which she did, and she's got a receipt here. And so I sent the appeal in. And I said, look, it's just a formality. They'll come back and they'll say, OK, yeah, apologies, the fine's been cancelled, the charge has been cancelled. But I was really surprised, and I was furious when I received the response, because it said insufficient evidence. Now, I didn't know what other evidence. If we'd have known at the time, we could have used our dash cam footage, which by that time had overwritten. So I went to Costa and asked them about it. They immediately recognised the problem and said, yeah, £90 for a coffee is a lot of money, and we've had other customers and staff receiving fines for the same. And the other thing that really left me frustrated was in the letter that said that your appeal has been rejected, as a goodwill gesture, they said it will give you another 14 days to pay the fine at a reduced rate as a goodwill gesture. And that really pushed the wrong buttons for me, to think that they thought they were giving me a goodwill gesture to pay £45 for a parking offence that wasn't committed in the first place.
Pete there talking about what happened to him and his wife, Sharon. Well, Ian got a fine last year when the parking machines were broken, but he says getting a signal to pay using an app doesn't always make things easier.
And it was an awful day. It was, again, a Saturday. It was absolutely pouring with rain, and we parked up to go and walk to the Memorial Hall. So it was in a car park quite near Memorial Hall. The machine, again, was down. And again, because of the weather and where we were, and I was surrounded with 2 or 3 other motorists, none of us could get a signal to pay the parking. So in the end, I ended up having to go into Beverley, go to a cash point, and hope that the parking attendant didn't come before I'd come back, and get some cash out, then change it into coins to come back to pay the meter. And that was the only way around. I was that worried about getting another parking fine after that.
Yeah.
Now, it seems it's very one-sided in a lot of respects, that, you do your utmost and you can, but then they'll fine you for not being able to do something for a service they cannot provide.
Ian there talking about his experience. He was trying to park in Beverley. Well, Scott Dixon is known as the complaints resolver, and he's a consumer and motoring disputes expert, and hoping he can help us out with some of our biggest parking problems. Hello, Scott.
Hiya, Carla. How are you?
I'm not too bad. Thank you very much for coming on. We've had
no problem at all.
We've had people getting in touch today with examples of what's happened to them. I'll start with Pete, who we heard from there. Yeah. His wife fined in a car park where they were told they'd overstayed. What had actually happened is they'd parked in the Costa car park, but the little camera had picked them up. You get 3 hours at Costa, 90 minutes at Lidl, so it seemed to the camera like they'd overstayed. They were sent a charge notice and appealed it, but had the appeal denied. Is this something you hear of often, first of all, with this camera mess up?
Yeah, this is a big problem on retail parks across the country, because there's various parking operators operate on different adjacent car parks, and the cameras and the signage. There's obviously a big problem in Pete's case, because he's not alone. Costa know that countless other motorists are being caught out, and that tells me that there's a problem with the signage and the positioning of the ANPR cameras. So my first port of call would have been to ask Costa to cancel it, because they do have the powers to cancel these tickets. Because, for example, if a staff member or a manager was caught out, you can rest assured they would step in and cancel it. And they can do that for customers as well, and so can Lidl. So I would have taken a two-pronged approach, and I would have gone to Costa or Lidl and asked one or the other to cancel it. And Lidl are very good at this generally. So that's the first stage I would have gone down, because the private parking operators, they just don't care. Their business model is to extract money from you with menaces, using intimidating language and legalese jargon. And virtually all first stage appeals are rejected. So evidence is key. So signage is the most common problem. And this falls under the Consumer Rights Act 2015, because terms and conditions of a sign, that forms the contract that you're entering into. And Section 62 of the Consumer Rights Act 2015 has a requirement for contract terms and notices to be fair, and an unfair term of a consumer contract is not binding on the consumer. And Section 68 of the Consumer Rights Act 2015 has a requirement for transparency. So the signs need to be clear, the terms need to be fair. And this is what you need to look out for when you're contesting unfair parking charge notices.
Yeah, I mean, they did contact Costa. They were given a receipt from Costa to prove that 2 minutes after being seen on the camera that they'd bought a coffee at Costa, but they sent that as evidence. But on their first appeal, and they have only appealed one time so far, they were rejected. And I know you've talked about this before, about not letting that put you off appealing again.
Yeah, virtually all first stage appeals are rejected regardless of any mitigating circumstances. So ask for a code so you can escalate it to the second stage, and check to see which trade body the parking operator is aligned with. And most of them are with the British Parking Association, and 42% of appeals on the second stage are upheld. So that tells you that 4 out of 10 are invalid, and roughly 1 in 4 parking charges are cancelled due to the operator not responding with any evidence within 21 days.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult, as you say, the letters that you get, and I've had them myself, intimidating language. They're quite aggressive. You panic sometimes into just paying it because you worry what might happen if you don't. I have appealed in the past as well, and I've put my registration number in incorrectly. I put a U instead of a V and had that appeal rejected. I mean, if it's human error, do you stand a chance of getting the charge quashed?
You do. And the first thing to remember is private parking operators cannot fine you. They simply issue invoices for an alleged breach of contract for parking on private land. And only councils can issue fines. And that's for infringements on public highways, like parking in bus lanes and double yellow lines. And with regards to keying errors, they should be cancelled on the first stage. That's in the legislation and the code of practice that the trade bodies send to the members to abide by. So, don't be
a font of knowledge with regard to this, but of course, if you're not, you don't know quite what to do. Ian got in touch. Now, this wasn't about sort of private parking companies. This was council, but he was fined when he couldn't get a signal for the app to pay to park, and the card machine and the coin machine on the car park wasn't working. He was given advice by an attendant to leave a note in the car, but he got a parking fine, and he was told when he phoned up about it that if you can't pay to park because a machine isn't working, for example, you can't park there, which, I mean, again, it seems outrageous, really. The onus surely is on the council to fix machines, not on the driver to then spend another 40 minutes trying to find somewhere to park.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I've come across this problem before as well. And councils, it's easier to escalate complaints when they're rejected on the first stage. And I'll give you a good example of what I did for the former boss of mine here in Edinburgh. He contacted me for advice, and you can find the key contacts in councils on LinkedIn by doing a search for these managers. So I gave him, Edinburgh City Council know me well, so I gave him the email addresses of the managers of the departments for parking. And I gave him pointers. And what the crux of it is, the defence on this case is the contract was frustrated by impossibility, because you were unable to get a signal through no fault of your own. You did everything you could to comply, and don't give up. And if it's not right, it's worth a fight, Carla.
And we heard from a lady earlier this week, Rosie, who racked up thousands of pounds worth of charges because she took longer than 5 minutes to get to somewhere where she could get into her parking app to pay against this mobile phone signal problem. So she spent that time trying to get a signal and then was given a charge. But we have heard with regard that companies are going to ensure that there is enough time for people to actually pay to park. They'll be given an extension to that initial time they're given. So the rules are changing a little bit, but to me, it doesn't seem like we're going to get much of a change with regard to parking and what we have to pay and how we have to pay it.
Definitely not. And so long as we have these trade bodies making the rules up as they go along and marking their own homework, things will never change. And I reviewed Rosie's court defence before the case was dropped. And the one and only parking charge notice that she paid was issued more than 14 calendar days after the parking event. And that's classed as a breach of Schedule 4 of the Protection of Freedoms Act 2012. And that states that any parking charge notices have to be issued within 14 days. And if they're issued later than that, there is no keeper liability. And you're only invited to disclose who the driver is. And nobody knows this, and it's a scandal. But I pointed this out to Rosie, and she put it to Excel Parking and asked them to donate the £60 that she paid to a chosen cancer charity of her will.
Yeah. Well, I mean, is there a sort of how to resolve a parking dispute for dummies book, which has all this information in that's easy to digest?
I do have a book. If you look on my website, thecomplaintsresolver.co.uk, I've got up to 20 templates that you can download for various different scenarios. And I've also published a book on Amazon, How to Complain, the Consumer Guide to Cancelling Parking Tickets and Winning Pothole Claims. So I've got a stack of advice on my website, and the templates can be downloaded for £3.50 and can save you up to £100 a pop.
Okay, well, that's good to know. Well, thank you very much for coming. I mean, we could talk for hours, I know, about all the different circumstances that people might have found themselves in and the do's and don'ts when it comes to challenging. But hopefully the information you've given has or will help people listening. So thank you very much for coming on, Scott.
A pleasure, Carla. Thanks for the invite.
Thank you, Scott Dixon, the complaints resolver, a consumer and motoring disputes expert with a website and templates with letters to send out, which cover lots of different circumstances you might find yourself in. There is a small cost to it, but it's there. It's available if that's a route you want to take. But yes, it's a scandal, and I just don't see it changing. I know we've had this slight extension with regard to the time that you're granted to actually pay to park, but I just think they're getting away with it, and I think they'll continue to get away with it. And when I say that, I'm talking about private companies and the council as well with regard to parking fines. Let me know if you've had experience of it, won't you? 08000 665 959.